Hey Pratik, how's it going?
Hello, hello.
Good to hear from you again. How have you been?
Yeah, likewise. It's been a while.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm super excited. I'm really grateful for you being willing to hop on and chat about this.
For sure. Yeah, I think this is exciting time for all of us. So this is a very topical discussion.
Yeah, for sure. Well, awesome. I'm gonna get this wrapped up here. I'm just getting like the description and everything set up for YouTube, and then right now it's listed as unlisted, so I'll make it live here in just a few minutes. So if you want to turn your mic and camera off for just a second, that's fine
Sure.
too. I'll just be working here for just a few moments in the background.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. All right. It looks like we should be going live here. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Ben Jacobsen. I am the host of the Shoot Your Shot Photo Show. And we are coming back to you today, and we have a very special guest with us here today, my friend and fellow photographer, Pratik Naik. And if you are unfamiliar with Pratik, he is a, a man of many talents. He is a retoucher of epic proportions, a photographer, of course, and he was also the creator of the Infinite Color Panel, which is a fantastic Lightroom plugin that does some really amazing stuff. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend checking it out. But all of that to say, that's not even what we're talking about today. So today we are going to be talking about the world of NFTs. And if you're unfamiliar or you've seen maybe the buzz kind of popping around and cycling of NFTs and cryptocurrency and all of this other stuff that we're not entirely sure maybe what it means, but kind of have heard things here and there. Today, we're going to try to clear that up for you. I am going to be playing the layman. I'm going to be playing that very professionally because I don't know a whole lot about it. And we're going to be talking with Pratik about how we can understand this a little bit better and how it may apply to my life, your life, and how it's going to actually impact maybe the world of commerce inside of art. So, all of that to say, we're super excited today to be talking with you and sharing out hopefully some very actionable and helpful information for you regarding NFTs or non fungible tokens. Pratik, welcome. I appreciate you jumping in here. I know that you've been going crazy all week with conversations. You've been super active on Clubhouse with answering these questions and sharing your experience as well. I appreciate you taking the time to jump on. You've been going crazy lately.
Yeah, of course. I'm really happy to be here. This is something that I want to talk about, especially this week. It's if you're watching this live, this week has been really instrumental for digital artists as a whole. Like for us, I think we heard it back about it back maybe a week and a half ago. So it's fairly new. And one of our friends is in the NFT space, and they've had a really good success with selling their work. And after that, we've seen a bunch of other really good case studies and examples of creatives that have, I guess, finally have gotten their dues for what their art is worth. And one thing I think coming into this industry as a photographer, as a creative, is we're always trying to make sure that we're being paid properly. And what happens is often we're undercut by other photographers. We're often pushed by clients that want to lower our rates. And finally, we have a market where we can put our work out there and get what I think the market determines we should get. So it's very fascinating.
Yeah, I think that that's kind of the part that's exciting for a lot of folks is understanding that, well, it actually seems like it's kind of a big trend in the last couple of years in general where the smaller guys, the smaller creators are starting to get a little bit more of that power back.
Mhm.
And you're seeing that with things like um, maybe this isn't a perfectly apt example, but Beeple. So Beeple is a digital creator that just had a massive payday by selling out a huge number of NFTs of his work. And that's just like digital graphic design art. So I think that people are seeing that they can commission and kind of sell their artwork as these unique pieces. And they're seeing like I think it's getting the gears spinning for a lot of people, is really what is kind of it boiling down to. But first, I wanted to take a step back just a little bit because I think that, as you alluded to, this is something that is relatively new for a lot of people. As I was kind of researching and preparing for this, I know that it's been around for a few years, but or maybe not a few years, but I know that it's been around for at least about a year or so that I've kind of found where people started actually having conversations about it. Um, but what does it actually mean? What does NFT mean in the context of I'm a photographer, I'm a wedding photographer, and I'm out there and maybe I take some photos on the side that I think are, fantastic photos that I maybe want to sell. What does NFT mean to those people and what does it actually symbolize?
Yeah. So I think to understand what this whole thing is to understand a traditional art market. So, for example, let's say you walk into a photography or art gallery, you actually end up finding pieces on the wall. that have sticker prices, sometimes very high and sometimes not so high, depending on the type of gallery you go to. There's different types of galleries, but the ones that we know are always the ones that have high ticket items.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because who determines that rate for that piece of art or that work or that photograph? And like, who is the person deciding that these are the photographs that should be on the wall? Well, you have a curator that goes out and finds artists or photographers that have future value or have composed something that has value now, even though they might not be known. So these curators get them into these galleries and then they showcase their work and they decide that based on, you know what, maybe their past sales, or if they're a new artist, based on what the gallery thinks they can make, they'll put a price on it. And it works very similarly in the digital world. Now, the main difference here is going to be the medium in which you create this piece. Obviously, with physical art, what happens is you can take that piece home with you, you can put it on your wall, you can do whatever you want. The question that comes up, number one, is I don't understand why I would pay for that digital piece of art rather than going to an art gallery and buying something physical. What's the difference? Well, when you think about it this way, the physical piece of art is maybe only worth a few dollars of supplies when you think about the sum of the materials. Whereas with the digital art, even though you don't have something tangible, the value doesn't come from the tangible piece of art. It actually comes from the ownership, it comes from the value. And those are the two things that people consider. So, for instance, if you have an certificate of authenticity, then what happens is the value is placed on, let's say, the edition that you have, like 1 of 10 or 1 of 1, and then you can resell that. So if you can authenticate it and say that you specifically, Ben, own that piece that I've sold or created, then you have the value of whatever you're purchasing comes in that certificate, if you want to put it that way. And the thing is, aside from it just being digital, the artist themselves or the creator, the photographer, can then also decide to send you a physical print and say, this is the NFT, you know, a representation of it. It's 1 of 10. You can sign it. So it's not just necessarily that you're buying a digital piece, but you're buying almost a part of the artist as well. You're buying a part of their future where they're going towards their value. And then everything else is just a token. It's a representation of that. So that digital piece you're getting or that print you're getting or whatever, yeah, actually you do get a print, but you're actually paying for the value of that artist, and the print or the digital is just a token of what they're worth.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And that's actually a very excellent way of explaining it because that is, as I've been, right, I think you're the one that originally kind of piqued my interest in NFTs when you were talking about fungibility. And I think that's where people started getting really lost. And I think that the way that you just described that makes a lot of sense because it's not necessarily the physical paint, it's not the canvas itself that makes it valuable. It's the artist and it's the the limited nature of it. Um, so so if we're saying NFTs, so non-fungible tokens is what that stands for. Um, that to me sounds like basically okay, so are we buying art just using cryptocurrency, or how does this differentiate itself from just going into this gallery, let's say, and this gallery saying, okay, well, we're not just selling physical paintings anymore. We're also going to sell digital rights, but we're just doing it, you know, with PayPal or you know, our traditional card swipe. How does it differ from something like that?
So the differentiation point here is actually the gallery's role in the sale. So for instance, for right now, if you want to actually sell an NFT or an art piece online, what happens is you have to go to one of these websites that the art is on sale for. Now, there's a couple of really big websites right now, and a couple of them are like Nifty Gateway is one of them. It's the
Mhm.
biggest one at the moment. There's also a Super Rare, which is another one, Maker's Place, and Foundation. Those are four main private ones, and then you have open ones. One is called OpenSea.io. You have Rarible. So those are the main names that you might see thrown around, and there's a ton of others up and coming. What happens is now the website itself makes the cut of what a gallery owner would make, or a curator, except the fees are a lot less as well. Number two, it democratizes the process of finding good art. And what I mean by that is when you have only a certain number of people gatekeeping the entire art community and saying only these are the people that are worth a resale value, what happens is it creates inflation for the value of certain artists and deflates the value of other artists. However, when you decentralize it and have it online, what happened now is that you get society and the creators and people and anyone being able to find all the pieces that you normally wouldn't be able to see unless you go to a gallery. But number two, you can vote with your dollar and say, I believe these are the artists that should have the value placed to it. So now, like, history means a lot more for a sale of the artist. Like, their past history means a lot. It's not going to be based on a couple of number of people telling the public only these guys are valuable. Now everyone can determine what artists are valuable.
Interesting. Yeah. So if I'm understanding this correctly, and I'm just going to kind of uh, offer what I'm kind of understanding. So the NFT is essentially, it can be used in our mind. We can imagine that as basically the certificate of authenticity. Is that, would you say that that's a fair way of understanding that?
Yeah, if you want to put it really simply, that's the best way because through the NFT itself, you can obviously write in certain things like, this is going to be one of 10 and you can verify it. So it's almost like a verification of ownership, of who owns it, like what time, where, etc. It's all written on a public ledger, basically.
Gotcha. And so that's where the crypto side of things kind of comes in, and my understanding is the reason that that's important is because, without getting too far into the weeds of blockchain and everything like that, blockchain is basically a public ledger of every transaction. So imagine right now in our regular economic world, if you're paying with cash, we always think of that as like an untraceable, or there's no paper trail, right? So inside of crypto, basically everything is going to be registered to one centralized public ledger. So everyone can see basically what transactions are taking place. So because of that, and because this NFT, or this certificate of authenticity, if you want to think of it that way, because that's being traded from person A to person B, and it's taking place on this public ledger, you can then, anyone in the world can verify the authenticity of this certificate publicly without having to worry about, oh, okay, well, this one's a forgery, or X, Y, and Z. You're actually getting a true, backed by millions of other data points, a true representation of who owns that item. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And again, I think that's so great because you also have transparency. And that transparency is something that was uncomprehendable to me because then it made me question our current, payment systems and the way our community is set up, where only, like, let's say the IRS might be aware of all the, interminglings of people.
And even
Um,
they don't know.
yeah, exactly. So it's so wild that these numbers can be unaccountable, especially when you have, the exact number being transacted across many people. And I think this also keeps things like fees very fair, like transaction fees, etc., going across the blockchain. And you can do more, like have contracts now, because again, since it's all public, well, you can put contracts in place and all kinds of things going into the future.
Yeah, speaking of contracts, I actually was I got a chance to jump in on your Clubhouse a little bit earlier, and someone was mentioning that they had recently read that there's an option for the original owner of a piece of artwork to build into the contract of their NFT,
Mm.
basically like a royalty. So every time that it's maybe not a royalty, that's not the right word to use there, but every time that it changes hands, so every time it's resold, the original artist gets like a percentage commission of that automatically,
Hmm.
which that that really piqued my interest, because not that I'm like the type of person that is producing, resellable artwork in that capacity, but what it makes me realize is that this is powerful because it's a trackable piece of information. And I say information, I really mean like whatever the NFT item is that you're selling, whether that's a GIF or a video or a photo.
Mhm.
It's a digital piece of intellectual property that can be tracked. So every time that it moves, after it's left your hands as the artist, you can still have eyes on it
Mhm.
essentially, and
Yeah.
understand what it's doing and what the value is. I mean, if you're talking like a Picasso or something that's going through a private sale, like you don't really know what those people bought it for,
No.
which uh, another point without getting too far off topic is someone I keep seeing a lot of people make the kind of ill-formed argument in my mind, or at least maybe not fully formed argument that it's going to it's going to increase money laundering for art. And art, I think everyone knows, is a pretty, or hopefully a lot of people know, is a really commonplace for money laundering.
Yeah.
But with this, because it's on the public chain and because you can see transactions that are taking place and you can see who owns it and things like that, you're avoiding forgeries, you're avoiding money laundering because it's more public. Granted, you can absolutely still, there's ways you can get around it where I'm sure people are going to do some sketchy stuff.
Yeah.
However, it's going to be a lot more brazen if you're on a public ledger. In my
Yeah. The
That's what it
only
seems.
the only thing about that is like you can keep your identity private. So a lot of buyers and buyers specifically are private. You don't know who they are. So you can, there's actually a lot of drug money going through the blockchain just
Oh,
because you see the transaction amounts, you can see that this number of Bitcoin has been transacted. And there's a lot of blog posts about really high valuations of transactions on the blockchain. So that's one point I think people were trying to bring up is they feel like a lot of the money coming into the NFT space is actually for, funneling money, drug money into it.
so yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good point then, because I mean that was one of the original, I think, arguments against blockchain or even Bitcoin in general in the early days. If you think back to like Silk Road, um, my understanding of it was that there is less anonymity with this, or am I incorrect in thinking that?
I think you can be more anonymous on this.
Interesting. Okay.
In the sense that when you make transactions, again, the things that are very visible are the amounts that happen. So it becomes very interesting to see where it's coming from. And if it's done correctly, you really don't know specifically like who's behind it. That's the biggest question. And one that is a double-edged sword because of course you can be private, but when you're making a sale and you're trying to contact buyers specifically and say, hey, like, thanks for doing this, or, understanding buyer psychology, it becomes a lot harder because you don't have a face to that name online.
Good point. Yeah, that's very true. So when you are when you're trying to see the value of some of these pieces of property that are being bought and sold, um, that actually, I think, almost reinforces the argument or reinforces the point that you brought up earlier, which is it's going to level the playing field a lot more between creatives that are the actual people creating the artwork or creating the pieces to be consumed, because you may not be able to see that George Ramos bought it, but you can see that somebody bought it for X amount of dollars or
Mhm.
X amount of, I guess, Ethereum, or, however you want to go through, which actually I did have one point of clarification. I was meaning to look this up, but it seems like everything is all based around Ethereum. Is this a Ethereum specific tool, or is
So
this available
currently
elsewhere?
it's on Ethereum. And Ethereum, for those of you who don't know, to keep it simple, it's just another digital currency that you can use. Bitcoin's obviously the most famous, and Ethereum is number two. And they just have different, I guess, functionalities to them and what you can do and can't do, and how like ecologically friendly they are when you're making transactions, things like that. Um, but Ethereum seems to be the most adopted one when it comes to NFTs so far. They're going to be making updates to it to make it better to use, and but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. There might be other cryptocurrencies that also pull ahead for different reasons. But right now, Ethereum is the one I think most people are propagating to.
Makes sense. So let's take a step back here a little bit. Now that we've kind of laid the groundwork of what it is and kind of its function in the world, um, I wanted to try to see if there is a like who does this apply to and who is this for? So I see this and I get really excited about like the nerd in me gets really excited about like the technological side of things and like how it's progressing and it's just new. I like
Yeah.
new stuff. I like being able to like kind of see where the world is evolving in that way. But who is this for? I'm thinking like if I am a wedding photographer and like that's what I do, is this applicable or is this something where it's kind of more reserved for like fine art?
Mm. So I think when you think of the current art market in general, I think this is so interesting because a lot of people will have to study the art market as well as what the NFT is to fully comprehend the picture. And we have been involved in the art space for quite a long time. And what we found is that there's different classes, so to speak, of artists that sell for different amounts. And similarly, they have galleries that represent those type of artists that sell for whatever. And it could be different genres. It could be anything. It could be fine art, up and coming fine artists. It could be street artists, whatever. So there's room for different genres and there's room for different price points and different entry levels. But what you will still find is there's going to be different classes when it comes to the current platforms. Right now, the main platforms are primarily invite only. So even if you for say wanted to get on one of the main platforms that are getting attention, it's very difficult for anyone to just jump on because what it does is it creates a lot of saturation in the market.
Mm,
And what happens is it decreases the price overall for all art. So I think it is for everyone, but it is something that's going to be an evolving answer because right now, currently, it's really, I wouldn't say it is for everyone because for those of for those who actually are going to do well, they might already have a history selling work of theirs. They might have a great following and a community where they want to invest in this artist. And again, these platforms also, um, they don't dump everyone's art there all at once. If they're doing it correctly, the right ones like Nifty Gateway, they schedule drops, and what a drop is a release. And when you have a drop scheduled, you get really full priority on your drop and your artwork, and then you can go in and buy it. So it creates a lot of value. Now that means if you're doing it curated and you do it correctly, it means that not everyone might be able to get on. There are platforms at the moment like OpenSea where anyone can jump in, start selling, but again, you're competing with a broad market, and maybe right now because everyone's jumping in, the value of what you put out there, if you don't already have a following, might not get a sale or even a bid. So I would say this is very good to know, but it's not necessarily that everyone has to jump in right now in order to benefit from it because it's going to be a very long-term game. This is not going to go anywhere. And just like when we started photography or video or anything in this realm, we spent years trying to get clients and mastering it. So it's going to be the same. Once you are introduced to it, it's going to take some time to build up a following, have buyer contact. You're going to have to. It's almost like starting again, trying to connect with people in the industry.
yeah, and that's kind of what I've seen from other folks who have been on this train for a little bit longer. Is it's essentially the same process as trying to get your work back out there again for the first time. I think that you said that so perfectly. Um, it is because I would imagine that it's going to be a lot of the same process of like, okay, I have to find my best work that I want to put forth. I need to make sure that I'm like it's up to snuff. I got to make sure that I'm making the right connections, marketing it to the right people, and that's after you get approved.
Yeah.
You even have to get approved to be on some of these. So the steps that are involved there, I think, um, kind of just lend itself to what you should be expecting.
Hmm.
I think another common answer that I'm seeing, or another common kind of comment that I'm seeing, is essentially people are like, oh, well, this is just the next get rich quick scheme, or people are just trying to make a quick buck overnight. And granted, there are some massive creators that have made serious coin in the last couple of weeks. However, those are also people that are extremely well established already inside the industry.
Yeah.
And I think that that same kind of goes for just about anything. Like if you look at, um, man, any platform really, if you look at a giant celebrity or something and they join a new platform, they get picked up overnight. It's
Hmm.
like, I can't remember, there was someone when they joined Instagram like a year ago or something, they had like the fastest growth to a million ever. And it was like in 30 minutes or something, they had
Oh
a
my
million followers.
gosh.
And it was just like, some insane uh, like numbers, and you're thinking about it and you're like, wow, that must be crazy. But if you think about it, they already have millions of followers elsewhere, so it makes sense. So when you see things like Beeple that is, having these huge paydays,
Hmm.
Beeple already had like 1 point something million followers or something like that. Like he was already a very well established graphic designer. um, Same thing, there was a band that recently released their first album on NFT, and it basically, like, I think people got like a certain number of like NFT contracts saying that they owned like a percentage of the original album, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's really interesting to see how it will play out and how it will evolve, because I think that there's a lot of people that are jumping on it because they're like, okay, this is the next wave.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss the GameStop like wave sort of thing. I think everyone's FOMO is at like an all-time high right now.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear you say that, uh, of leveling expectations and making sure that people know that this is not a overnight success sort of thing. This is something that, although some people have had that success,
Hmm.
this is a long-term play here.
Yeah, and it's across multiple platforms too. So let's say that you spend time getting into one of the major platforms, you get on there, and next week there's another one that's actually getting all the attention. It's so let it level out a bit, I think. If you're in the starting out stage, there's no particular hurry there. If you're in your later stages where you're more established and trying to quote unquote take advantage of this opportunity, then it becomes different because you again you still have to try and like find the invites and whatever, but don't have FOMO because right now it's changing. Like I think yesterday they stopped having invites for people for I think most of the major platforms now. So it's a day by day thing, but keep your eye on it. Things like this are very important to listen to. Just stay in the know, stay on Twitter. Twitter's where everyone's posting a lot of stuff now, especially in the NFT market. And just keep your eyes open. And don't, whatever you do not listen to people who are denouncing it because they don't understand it. That's the difference. Like it's different if you understand it and say, well, it's not for me, but here are the advantages. But I believe that as a creator of any digital kind, it is a benefit to us to be able to champion this and understand it and push it as far as possible without detracting from it. I think the people that detract from it don't understand it and therefore feel like they're too good for it or whatever it is.
That's kind of how I started my journey, and my journey is short, but that's kind of how I understood blockchain when it first came out. I've been familiar enough with how that kind of works for a number of years now, and that's kind of where I was at. I was like, okay, right now this is not for me, but like I understand like the implications of what this technology means. And I think that's, again, alluding back to what I kind of mentioned towards the top, is there are implications that we can't even fathom yet that
Mm,
this is going to take the place of. I think if we look at how, um, decentralized finance or DeFi has shifted the market already,
mhm.
with things like Bitcoin and blockchain, Ethereum, all of these things, Dogecoin, and whatever it is that your cup of tea is. I think everyone is at least familiar with how much it's shifting things. It
Mhm.
may not affect your everyday life yet, but I think that that day is on the horizon sometime soon. Um, and I think that's kind of what's exciting about these sorts of things, NFTs, is just because, like I mentioned, like if you are a small musician Like I have a friend who is a music producer, and like what he does is like he creates like beats and like he does these things, and he's always like trying to find, buyers for what's going on. And if you think about any popular song, like really popular song, almost every single one of them has a sample from some other song in it.
Hmm.
Like rap songs, I know are just like especially like super commonplace, like to sample other music.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But like, imagine if you were able to, if you were one of the guys that originally created one of those samples, and that's being used over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other albums
Hmm.
and other songs. Like there are some instances that like there's royalties paid back, but man, if you
Yeah.
research it, it's almost none. It's
Yeah.
almost none.
That's so true. Like that's one thing I'm glad about is now that when you have like a resale of your art on because it's on public ledger, you get that kickback coming in. Whatever the site states or the NFT states, whatever percentage that is, it's a good feeling. So even on the secondary market, which is what they call it, you get a lot of money from that, and it's beyond just how much did it sell for, but also sometimes they make a lot more on the secondary market on the post sales. So that's one thing people don't really consider.
Yeah, and I think in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of focus on. Um, I think with the rise of people like Gary Vee and all of these other influencers, like that are talking about passive income.
Hmm.
And it's like, man, if you want to talk passive income, like create a body of work that will continue to pay you after you make your initial sale.
Hmm.
I mean, and that's something that even crossed my mind too, as I was like, man, with these residual options, like you can really genuinely create a true passive income with the right body of work.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in the space that is something that can be often replicated, like music or things like that.
Hmm.
Um, One thing that I wanted to get your take on it, and this is another common one, is so for example, there was uh, a GIF that I think a lot of people are going to be familiar with, which is the Nyan cat.
Hmm.
And that GIF just recently sold for a pretty substantial sum of money
Yeah.
recently, right?
It was like half a
Um,
million or something.
yeah, so $500,000 equivalent in Ethereum. So to folks that are asking, why would you spend basically $500,000 on a GIF? I
Mhm.
can right click and save and use this GIF anywhere I want, and no one's knocking on my door with handcuffs. Like,
Yeah.
so can you maybe walk people through that are still kind of wrapping their head around what's the purpose of spending such very serious money on something that is intangible, such as the Nyan Cat GIF?
Yeah. So let's say you have a GIF, right? Like let's say that even a meme, for example, like memes are probably going to sell if you're owner of the meme. If you have a GIF and you sell it and someone buys it, and let's say you, Ben, download it and you're like, I own the GIF now. It's the same thing that you have. Like, sucks for you. You paid 500,000. I didn't pay anything. Like, but the question isn't about possession, it's about ownership.
Okay.
So possession and ownership are different, where you obtain it and you possess it. However, you don't own it per se.
Mm.
And own it, from my personal opinion, is something that's verifiable. And so what happens is, let's say you try to sell that GIF on the blockchain, it's going to have zero value because everyone's like, well, you didn't buy the original, so this has no value. I am not buying that one. I am buying from the guy who actually bought from Yancat because he owns the actual physical thing of it. Now, the GIF itself is like not useless, but obviously you can't do anything with it. You can't like eat a GIF. You can't eat a painting. Like you can't.
Watch
You
me.
can look at both of them. You can look at painting. You can look at a GIF. You can do that. That's great. There's not much you can do with art aside from enjoy and experience it. So, what happens is the value itself again is actually based on what it represents and the owner. If you can verify that it's yours, you have the buying power and selling power. Whereas if you just download a random GIF, you don't have anything. Like no one's gonna buy that gift from you. I'm not gonna buy your collection of memes from your computer. You know, like you can't just sell a meme like collection and say I'm selling 1,000 memes for $1. Like no one's gonna buy it. But if you are are buying the original rights or you know additions from the owner of Nyan Cat, you suddenly it's like wow, it's directly from the artist, and now I can sell it again. Everyone knows it's mine, and then most of the people buy it to sell it. Like they'll buy the art piece, and then if they know that they're going to get 20% on their money, it's easy flip.
And that actually brings up a really good point that I did want to kind of bring up and mention
Mm-hmm.
at some point. So that's a perfect segue. The One of the things that I think a lot of people are not fully giving enough weight to is that even in a traditional art market, most people that are buying art, or I would say a sizable percentage of people that are buying art, are not buying it because they absolutely love the Monet,
Yeah.
like a specific Monet painting. The reason they're buying it is because it's an investment. Jay-Z's got a song about it where he's talking about buying paintings and he buys it for $1 million and then next year it's worth 2 million, then it's worth 8 million. Like that's why. And part of that is because it's Jay-Z that owned it, but it's also because it's, a piece of art. It's something that's an investment. It's something that people find value in. There's culture there. And the irony of referencing the Nine Cat as culture is comical, but it's true. Like
Yep.
it
It's
really is a part
culture
of our society.
now.
And the other thing too is
Yeah.
one point
Most
that I've
people.
seen. Oh, sorry. I think you might have froze up a little bit there. Are you still with me? Oh, there we
Yeah.
go. Yeah,
Okay.
you're good. Sorry. What were you saying?
I was gonna say like I think you're gonna see like museums of just memes and gifs in the future to represent our culture, and I'm surprised it hasn't been done yet, but like that will happen.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time, and I think people find that just absolutely hilarious right now. But give it 10 years, 15 years, I can 100% see it because it is that I think that there's entire conversations that happen based around a meme, and
Yeah.
it's a part of our lexicon. It's part of what we just talk about now. Like it's there. Um, but one thing I was going to mention is the other part about owning the original and having the rights to it versus just a version of it.
Hmm.
So going back to that GIF example of the Nyan Cat. So with that, you can say, "Oh, I have this saved on a thumb drive," but that doesn't necessarily give it value. The value is in saying, "I own this."
Hmm.
And so that's like saying, and the this example has been beat to death, but it's like having the Mona Lisa. Like you can have the Mona Lisa, and that's worth. I mean, I don't even know if you can put a price on it. It's limitless in its potential value. Or you can have a print of it,
Yeah.
and it's like the print of it might be worth $18,
Yeah.
and it's like, or if you get like an official print of it, then it might be worth like $1,000 or a couple
Right.
$1,000.
Yeah.
Or if you get like an official like reproduction of it, then that might be worth like $50,000 or something. Like you can get like different variations and skills of this, but
Yeah.
it's still at the end of the day, to your point, it's worth maybe $3 worth of paper and ink.
Yeah.
So it's like where's the real value in it? Why is a digital asset more valuable than a physical tangible piece of asset?
Hmm.
And I know that I threw some shade Gary Vee's way a little bit earlier, but he actually had a really good point about NFTs. He said people are always concerned with, okay, I own a piece of a digital space. Let's say you own the rights to a meme. What's the value in that? Well, he brought up a good point and he used the example, why do people care if they have a blue check mark next to their name on Twitter?
Yeah.
Like we live in a digital space, we live in a digital world. Like why is it so hard to fathom that you would want to own digital real estate?
Hmm.
And you can even look at it as that way. Like it's real estate. You're buying a piece of the internet in some capacity,
Yeah. And
which is
honestly,
fascinating.
also, like, I don't think it even matters why it matters, you know? Like, who cares? As long as you know what the value is of it and why, how much you can get from it. I think the thing here to understand is everyone's so obsessed about the why are they buying this for this much? Like, just because you can't fathom it doesn't mean it's not like worth being involved in it. You know, it's like you can still take advantage of something and not understand it fully. Like you, in terms of, you know, why people buy something. And again, sometimes there are illogical reasons. You're never going to find a logical reason. I think people are looking for what's the most reasonable reason. And sometimes it's not. Like emotions are not logical and reasonable. We're humans. We're not aliens yet. So I think
Not yet.
yeah, and maybe in the future when humans become actually intelligent, we will find that these things won't have value as much anymore. You will find other things that have value. So as long as you understand what the market is doing and the trajectory, I think those are more important than understanding the that aspect of it. And know that the market determines the value. As long as you understand that principle, you can kind of figure out what amount you should be worth being paid for, and what expectancy of return you might get if you buy a piece or sell a piece for that matter.
Yeah. And that's true. And I mean, I think that's another good point is we often try to find the logic in every capacity, especially when something seems foreign or maybe too good to be true, or you see people making a bunch of money really quick. I think for a lot of people, bells start going off in their head and they're like, well, something's got to be up. This is way too fishy and I don't understand it. So therefore, I don't like it.
Mhm.
Which, if you don't understand it fully, like it's probably best to not get involved if you don't understand it at all. Like
Yeah.
if you're not willing to put in the time and the effort to understand it, like you're right, it's probably not for you. But if you think that the world is run on logic now inside of the art scene, like what was that one the crazy modern art thing where it was like the banana that was like taped like duct
Yeah.
taped to the thing like some people see insane value in that and some people just see insanity in that.
Yeah.
Where you fall on that spectrum doesn't have any logical reason behind it. Like they always say art is in the eye of the beholder, and I really think that that reigns true.
Mhm.
And so, like, if you try to logic it too much into a little box and be like, oh, it doesn't make sense because this little leg is sticking out of the box and it doesn't fit here. Like, you're going to be in for a bad time because it's going to be really, really difficult to have a fully logical explanation for anything.
Yeah, like even our stock market's not based on logic. It's not based on real prices. It's
Perfect
not
example.
based on anything. It's based on emotion. So if you're an empath and you understand the emotion and the psychology of how people work and that whole thing, it'll become a lot easier for you to comprehend it. And if you don't work that way, that's fine too. But know that you're not going to find a reasonable answer, and to just mock it is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It shows that you don't understand and you're trying not to understand.
Yeah. That's a great point. I did want to touch on real quick. I wanted to hear your kind of experience because if I understand correctly, your wife Bella, just recently started diving into this alongside this with you as well.
Yeah.
What has your guys' process and what does your journey look like as you're starting to not only understand and learn more about NFTs, but actually putting things out there to the world as a purchasable item? Like, what has that process been like for you guys?
Very confusing. So we had
Very.
we had a lot of time to reflect on if we should even be in this space, or between us, which one of us should be there, or maybe both, or maybe none. But Bella Kotak, she's a fine artist for those of you who don't know, and she creates a lot of pieces of her work in a fantasy type setting.
Mhm.
So she has a following. She's been in galleries. I feel like we had the right recipe for it, at least, and especially with the connections that we also have, and yeah, just that whole thing. So once we realized it was worth getting into and trying out without expectation, we started researching about the technology, because we're not familiar with it. So we learned about all of that stuff. First of all, we learned about what is cryptocurrency, and then we was like, what's Ethereum? Those are the two terms. And number one, like, what's a blockchain? Like, if you understand generally what those three things are, you can get started. Then looking into like platforms to sell art and the process of setting that up, and like how do you take your money and go in from dollar to Ethereum, and then how do you set up a store where people are going to be buying your work? How do you get into those things? And those are the questions we started asking. We started asking around, does anybody have any invites for these platforms? What tips do you have to get into them? And we started just contacting people and just seeing what would stick. So there was no path, because there's no path formed. It's literally going into a forest and just chopping shit down until you're progressing forward. And you might have to go sideways and then make a left. You might learn a lot from your process. So if somebody asks like, what's the process of it? The only thing I can say is getting your work on a site is the process, and setting up conversions for dollar to Ethereum. But the psychology of also understanding, is it worth your time to do it now? And once you get a scope of that, that's how we decided, if we're going to go forward with it. She hasn't put up a piece just yet. We're doing that actually tomorrow or this evening, and
Nice.
we're going to see what happens.
That's super exciting. Yeah, I can definitely agree. I've been trying to research a little bit of like how tos and guides and like things that people are like how they're doing it, and it's the Wild West right now. I don't think that there's really a lot of people that are out there writing guides on how to do that. So
Mhm.
uh, maybe some content ideas in the future. But yeah, it's really interesting to see everyone's different approach on how to go forth with it. Is there a reason that you decided to go with the platform that you did as opposed, because you mentioned you getting it on the platform is the hardest part. Did
Mhm.
you opt away from something like OpenSea or
Yeah, I so while we were finalizing the art pieces that we wanted Bella to put up there, we simultaneously were thinking about what is the best place to, I guess, start. And the answer is actually going to be wherever you can start, rather than waiting too long if you are in a position of feeling like you could probably sell right now. But simultaneously, when that was going on, we actually ended up on Maker's Place, and that is something that is quite difficult to get into, relatively speaking. And she just had luck meeting with one of the team members and getting their eye on her work. So it was from a discovery process. And our like Beeple's auction from, is also like on Maker's Place, I believe, as well. And like our friend, couple of friends are on there. And so we decided like that would be the right ecosystem for us. Like it represented the values of who else they represented on their platform. So it just felt like being in good company. And that's why we decided with that. Otherwise, we would have, tried to put it on OpenSea or anywhere else that would have availability.
yeah, that makes sense. So are you when you guys are going through and beginning to create like your first kind of round and testing this, what is it that you do for marketing for that?
Mhm.
You had mentioned that certain sites do like a drop where they'll just release everyone's, like a chunk of people's work, like a pot of people, I guess,
Mhm.
all at once, and then you have a group of new work to sort through and look and see if you want something. That way, it's not like a constant trickle feed, right? It's kind of just like a once a week or something they'll release like a bunch of artwork. Is that right?
Yeah, so the usually sites do drops daily. So like
Okay.
Nifty will do them, I think, daily. From what I've seen for the last like few days, it might not be the case, but they'll do daily. Some people might not do any drops, like they might not do any features on the page, on the home page. So then that becomes a case of knowing your market and knowing how to promote, and that creates a lot of like collaboration between the creatives in order to make sure that like once something drops, everyone's going to sharing about it basically. And I think that's the process where we're using right now, is just being more involved in the community, helping other artists, so that when it's time to help us, it happens, and vice versa. So have a strategy in place. Like just because you put it on a platform doesn't mean it's going to be seen. Like you will still have to do some of the legwork and get in touch with buyers as well. If you find some, just really study and be involved because you're not. This is not something you can do hands off. It's a very hands on kind of field.
Yeah, it seems quite involved.
Yeah,
And I think that might be another lesson to maybe take away from this. As we were kind of mentioning, if it's not for you, maybe not getting involved is the right course. But also, if you already have your plate full, from what
mm,
I can tell, it seems like this could be a really good solution if you've already got all the pieces in place and you're just chugging along and you just need to add an extra little branch of revenue income. But
exactly.
that being said, it still sounds like it's quite an undertaking.
Yeah.
Do you feel like from what you've seen so far, of course, do you feel like the marketing for how to sell things as an NFT is going to be separate from how you would sell them in a traditional art space?
Yes, because what happens is now with NFT being an option, I can foresee, for example, like if you're somebody who sells prints, you might have, let's say, a print store or a storefront where you A can sell physical prints, but also link to your NFT at a different value prospect of the same print. So, for instance, I'm selling the same photograph. One is NFT, one is a regular print. The NFT could be editions of 10, whereas the physical print can be open editions. And therefore, you can create a higher price for the NFT version. And what that also does is it starts getting your name out there because since it's all online, it's kind of like a social media network where buyers can see, well, like you can see if you like a particular buyer, what pieces they've purchased in the past. So they're
Hmm.
almost like doing the work for you if you can get your traction out there. And as more people have access to buying, they might be buying digital prints because they're also making a cut of that too. Like it's easier for you to buy a digital print and sell it to someone else than trying to buy a physical print and selling that to someone else because the marketplace is bigger. It's easier to make that transaction, and you make a cut, I make a cut, and it's like a mutually beneficial scenario here. So you're going to see different strategies and calculations for pricing versus physical prints. It's going to be very interesting.
So, do you foresee any sort of issues with? Because towards the top of the show, we mentioned part of the issues with the current working art marketplace is that you have a very select few curators and galleries that are kind of calling the shots for where the art community and the art industry as a whole is kind of going.
Mhm.
Do you foresee or do you fear that happening with these new platforms that are kind of wielding the power of allowing or only allowing certain people to come through? And then, of course, inside of a digital space, you also have to worry about things like algorithm changes. So I think that's a constant thing in any artist's life. We're all afraid of that terrible, terrible A word. And my only thought is like, do you think that we're maybe just trading one evil for another in that capacity?
Yeah, I do worry, and I what I mostly worry about is the curation. I think it's because blockchain should be like democratic in a way, where it's very visible and clear, and you know exactly what's happening everywhere you want to. But what happens when you bring in platforms? You are at the mercy of the people running the platforms, and we don't know who they are. No one knows yet, and we had that's a discussion that hasn't happened really, from what I've seen, is how do they particularly curate and who is a curator? And, are they doing it just because of the person's name or are they doing it for the art? What's the real deal here? And you would hope to see that other platforms rise in the future, kind of like OpenSea, but also has some curation where it's a little bit more fair to everyone. So I don't know, like that's something I do wonder quite a lot about.
Yeah. Well, what do you see this doing to kind of feeding off that same topic? What do you see this doing to the traditional art market? Do you foresee this potentially being a um, sort of a torpedo in the traditional art market? So, for example, I say that meaning um, uh, let's even use like Bella's work for example, just to say, for example here, if she was selling something like a large print at a gallery,
Mhm.
do you think that the ability for her to command a certain price is going to be negatively impacted by this new technology?
Mm. My understanding is that if she's very successful in the digital space, it'll create more value in the physical space. Because what happens is from the success in the digital space, you end up getting a lot of attention, generally speaking, and to her profiles. And that attention and growth just only elevates and escalates the entire value. So what happens is if she then were to create a print, a framed print for a gallery, that will automatically have more value specifically just because she's able to have gained that notoriety in the digital space. And also, when you sell digital work, often it might even create scarcity for the physical item. So what happens is because everyone else is buying the digital, and Bella might be producing less physical art, that physical each of those pieces get bigger. And secondarily, you start attracting the eyes of gallery owners that have found you in the digital space that you might not have ever found in the physical world without this being a vessel for discovery.
That's a really good point too. And one other thing that I actually heard, and it might have been in one of your conversations previously, but um, the idea that an NFT or the certificate of authenticity is only going to represent something digital,
Mhm.
something intangible you can't physically touch or hold, is kind of a short-sighted approach to it. Because again, it seems like this is maybe more or less can be looked at as a certificate of authenticity or a contract.
Mhm.
And I've even seen that there are some artists that are including a physical painting or physical print or physical signed piece of work
Mhm.
along with the NFT that's saying, hey, not only do you have this physical piece, but like here's the digital rights that's backing up that you actually own this. So it's it's the same sort of general idea of going out right now and buying a Picasso with, US dollars
Mhm.
and then having that certificate of authenticity, but that certificate of authenticity is basically ironclad because it's backed up by this overarching giant system that we call blockchain.
Mhm.
So I did want to mention that just because I think that that's also another common misconception is that it only has to be a digital item. It
Mm.
can be something very physical and tangible. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of liken it to like a real estate listing where imagine I mean, you obviously don't buy the house from the website, but let's say you could. Like, let's say you're like, that's the house for me. I'm going to buy it and I own it. So then you make the purchase and you get the picture of the house and then you get a contract of the house, but then you also get the house. So it's like, you know, the certificate happens on the purchase side of the online part, but then you're right. Like, you could deliver a physical piece and that might be the way forward. People might be like, I want a physical piece, and that'll incentivize me to do the digital purchase. And well, sure. Like, if that's what's stopping you from feeling like this is not a physical thing, then we're just going to supply a physical thing. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
You still save
And
profits.
yeah, I mean, and I think it also just boils down to like providing what people want. At the end of the day, I think if you're looking at it as a potential artist and you're like, well, I can't wrap my head around the idea of selling rights to one of my photos, but not actually sending someone a print. I think you can leave that in the dust. You can send a print too. You can have those prints serialized to where you can, inside of your blockchain contract, your NFT, you can actually list all of that information out, if I'm not mistaken. And you can show the sort of certificate and you can show the ownership
Hmm.
through a verifiable or verifiable public ledger.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I think the visibility aspect here is making things a lot more interesting because if it was behind closed doors, if it was like a digital art gallery with the same kind of issues that the traditional world has, that would have been a problem. But now there's more transparency behind all of it, and even the information is something that we can all learn. It's not closed off to a certain few. It makes it really, really exciting.
Yeah. I think the democratization of being able to get into some of these upper echelons of of the art world without having to go through a gallery and curator and stuff. I think we're seeing a lot more power coming back to some of the smaller creators, kind of like we were mentioning earlier. And I think anytime that you're going to give more people the ability to kind of equal the playing field, you're always going to end up with, finding some people and some new talent that you never would have discovered otherwise. And I think that's a really exciting prospect.
Yeah, and I think like even as artists, we can kind of vote for who should be seen next. Like if I decide that Ben, you release something, you don't have a following, but I believe in you and your progress as a creative, I can go and buy that piece, put it in my little online gallery. And if a buyer comes to my collection and then says, "Wow, I like this guy's work, he's valuable," you can also see what is this guy buying. So
Good point.
a you become a curator as well as somebody who profits. So we're all raising each other in that way, and we're creating like little systems. It's also bad in a way because obviously if you're new and you don't know anybody but you're a good artist, it's a bit difficult. But that's going to be anywhere in the world. So
Exactly.
the takeaway here is start networking, connecting, and put your work out there and your name out there, even if you don't feel like it. It's just do it.
Man, perfect summarization. I think is just get out there and do it. Well, Pratik, we are just at the top of the hour. I wanted to thank you again for jumping on. I know that you've been going real hard with the NFTs lately, and it seems like it's going to be an exciting route for you guys. So I'm excited to see what you guys come up with. Um, Ping me and let me know when you guys drop Bella's work. I'm really excited to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. These were great questions, and I think people, are going to look at this as a way to understand it really well too.
I really hope so. And thank you again for going through and explaining and taking the time. I hope this has been helpful to you guys as well watching. If you guys have any questions for myself or Pratik, you can always reach out to us. I'm going to include links to our social and everything down in the
Mhm.
description below. So if you guys have any follow up questions, be sure to reach out to us there.
Perfect.
Pratik, thanks again. I really do appreciate it. It's been fantastic catching up and talking with you again. Um, Thank you guys again for tuning in. I will see you guys on the next one.
All right, Ben. Take
Thanks,
care.
Pratik.
Mhm.